Is it me? Am I the drama? I don't think I'm the drama. Maybe I am. Am I the villain? I don't think I'm the villain.
Bruh.
Pick up that MP5 and 4 flashbangs.
Mine for the taking! A test of your reflexes!
Hello, I'm Imacuttlefish aka Baker here with some more spicy Endwalker story content. I was rather surprised at how well received Zenos was in Endwalker, and it's not hard to see why. And so, of course, I wanted to create a video on his portrayal in Endwalker, as I do think there are plenty of interesting things to discuss about him. However, there's already been videos made on him, such as Stout Helm's or Quasi's wonderful videos. So instead of just rehashing what's already been said, I wanted to hyper-focus on a singular aspect of his story, go more in detail within that one aspect, and hopefully that way I can deliver something that is a bit more refreshing. That aspect I chose is the fight itself. I think it's quite fitting with Zenos. After all, this fight with the Warrior of Light is such a huge part of the character's story and motivation. So let's discuss everything good they did with the fight. This includes the lead up, the fight itself, and the immediate consequences of the fight. Though as a forewarning, it will be a lot of gushing and rambling and going real geek mode into it, which is for the simple reason that I really want to highlight some of the legit smart design choices made here. Oh, and there will be spoilers for Endwalker, duh. To super TLDR Zenos' story up until this point, he wants to fight the Warrior of Light, his plan doesn't work. Through introspection, he comes up with a plan that might work. He flew to help you fight the Endsinger. Together you clap the Endsinger, meet Hyun do the thing, Zenos appears to talk to you, which is where we get to the first thing that I want to focus on.
Such pleasures you seek for their own sake, and no other reason. Is this not so, adventurer?
I love this because this is some real multi-dimensional shit going on right here. As in, you can interpret Zenos' sentiment from like 3 different angles at least. The first and most obvious is that you began your journey as a simple adventurer and only earned these titles like Warrior of Light, Savior of Ishgard, the Liberator, the Warrior of Darkness and others later on. So by referring to you as an adventurer, he is calling back to your roots. And in turn, it makes sense for Zenos to realize this because he came from a privileged upbringing, yet never cared for said privilege. It only hindered him if anything. So him respecting the Warrior of Light coming from nothing is quite sensible. The other way of looking at it is in a meta sort of way, that you, as a player, are always looking for the next most challenging fight, even if sometimes you might have to wait for nearly 2.5 years to get said challenge. What I mean to say is that this also has the potential to appeal to the player themselves through asking if this was a big motivation for them to play through the story and continue playing the game. Now, the final angle I'm gonna mention is probably the most interesting one, and I'm curious if anyone watching thought about it this way. It is taking the idea that your character is an adventurer and taking it to its furthest degree by saying that it is more than that it isn't merely the way you started out, but rather that it is your character's very meaning in life. To meet new people, to travel to places you've never been, to experience fresh things and overcoming conflicts along the way. But you can take this idea one step further still and say that it is not only your meaning in life, but it is more or less your duty as Azem's reincarnation. I am sure many of you have noted this, but the plot point of you being Azem isn't just some random thing the writers tossed in there for the heck of it. It is emphasized over and over, often in the form of Azem's memories and the constellation crystal. What I am leading up to here is that you are the embodiment of and the living legacy of the long dead ancient that was known as Azem, and when you stop to think about it from that angle and consider what he would have done, would he have walked away like a little bitch or go, oh, the sole person in the entire universe who can threaten me in a one-on-one is challenging me after I save the world? Sure, why not? Let's see what happens. I mean, really, we are talking about the same guy that does a ton of crazy shit like rushing headlong into a volcano. Of course he would accept the deal. Another way of looking at it is, are you doing this for Zenos or for yourself? This is a genuine question because I have heard people express both. I've heard people say that they felt like Zenos deserved this fight because of what he did at the end there, and people that say that they themselves deserved the fight. You could even interpret it as when Alphino and Alize implore you to find happiness at the end of your journey, that perhaps getting this fight could have been that bit of happiness for you. Whatever the reason, I just want to bring this up because I've heard a complaint before that they didn't want to fight Zenos because doing so will give him what he wants. I just want to propose an alternative point of view which is asking, is that really the case? But I will discuss this point more later. Now, let's talk about the dialogue options. In my Shadowbringers analysis, I talk about how one of the improvements they made to storytelling within that expansion was making many of the dialogue choices more nuanced and have better character expression. Naturally, Endwalker is a continuation of that, and there are countless awesome dialogue options you can choose in this expansion. But I feel like these three options here before fighting Zenos are the best representation of just how brilliant these options can be. I have spent literal hours discussing different choices that people went for, and that's not an exaggeration in the slightest, because there are so many ways that one could perceive of themselves or their character in order to come to one of these choices, and I absolutely love how there's enough of a range of expression here, but still limited to three relatively simple choices. I believe this is the peak when it comes to character expression within an avatar in an MMO. I can't of course talk about every single approach one could make, but I will try to talk a little bit about all these choices and what they mean, so that you can better appreciate how marvelous this is from a structural point of view. So the most readily apparent thing to point out would be to look at how you choose to reciprocate Zenos' sentiment. The first one is positive, the third one is negative, and the second one is neutral. I think the developers realized that they were taking a risk with this inclusion, because they knew some people wouldn't care for Zenos as a character even after all that's happened, so the third choice is good for such people. The first choice being for those who liked him, and the second one is for those who are kind of on the fence or apathetic towards him. So this perspective could be considered from the viewpoint of how you perceive Zenos as a player, not as the Warrior of Light. However, when looked from the viewpoint of the Warrior of Light in setting, going for option 1 is obviously there to recall your nature of being a simple adventurer and a challenge junkie, that sure, you enjoy the thought of overcoming a challenge for its own sake, even if you don't necessarily seek out said challenges to the extreme degree that Zenos does. In this option, the Warrior of Light chooses to basically pursue their own happiness, even if it is a little selfish. Option 2 then recalls more to you as the Warrior of Light, as the hero, and looks at it from the perspective of, okay, if you don't defeat Zenos here, he will most likely keep following you around till the end of days and keep causing trouble, and in the worst case scenario, killing your friends and people that you hold dear. It's looking at Zenos like a kid with a lighter, that he's a danger to himself and to those around him, and the correct thing to do is to end him there. By contrast to option 1, the second one is more selfless in nature, but could then be argued that the Warrior of Light didn't derive as much happiness from the situation. Option 3 has you finally give in to Zenos' BS and come at him in anger. I'll talk more about this in a bit. So the angle I just described was looking at it from a logical point of view, but this next angle looks at the options from purely an emotional perspective. As in, How much emotion will you convey in your response? The third option has the most emotion put into it. This is you basically saying, screw you, I have grown sick of you and I want you dead right now. It is a powerful response that really emphasizes just how much you despise Zenos, and you can really see it by your character's facial expression when delivering the line, they are pissed. The second choice by contrast is the least emotional and the most calculative, if you will. You could say that this response is straight up cold, and it is brought home by the straight face your character keeps while saying the line. The first one is sort of between these two. You could be riding off of the adrenaline or just be hyped to fight him or whatnot, perfectly encapsulated by your character smirking as they say it. The final angle I will cover is Zenos' response, because this is also interesting.
Ha! Acceptance! At long last! The conflagration of our clash will scorch even the stars!
The first option yields the shortest response, as is to be expected, because it is the response that Zenos anticipated, and thus he basically goes, yeah boy, let's fight.
So you would still play the hero? No matter. In acceptance, you betray your deception. You know full well what we are and what we seek. To shine incandescent in death's shadow.
The second option stings him the most, and you can really feel it. He clearly does not like the fact that still, after all the effort he went through, you are not putting in the passion into this fight that he was hoping for. And unironically, if you are a hater of Zenos, the second choice is actually the best, because in a way you are giving him the middle finger.
Ha! Finally mustered the desire to kill me, have you? Go on then. Try and strike me down in this forsaken place. I shall return the favor. Aye, let us indulge in the only worthwhile pursuit and burn our lives to their end.
I said I'd talk more about the third choice, so here it is. Zenos' reaction is rather interesting for this one. You can tell he's a little bit bamboozled. He spent all that time in introspection and came to help you out so that you'd finally be his friend and return the favor. Yet it turns out that in the end all he had to do was keep pestering you and you would come after him in anger, just as he tried to do for the first 1/3 of the game. That everything he did after the level 88 solo instance in Garland mode onward was basically a waste of time. He didn't need to do that. But he sorta takes it and runs with it. I'm not saying that this was your reason for picking this option, mind you. However, this is definitely how it felt from Zenos' perspective. These are just a few ways in which I could interpret these dialogue choices, but really my point here is that I find these three options absolutely fascinating. Sure, you could say they are the simple dialogue options and you aren't supposed to think too hard on them. That's true, but we can still stop to appreciate the brilliant game design that is on display here, and I am definitely curious to hear what you all picked and for what reason. Can I also add that I love how this fight is structured? You have the two most powerful remaining fighters that we know of in the realm having a one-on-one. Both of them are held back by being bruised from the previous fight, yet both carry a boon. Zenos absorbed an enormous amount of ether from what remained of the Mother Crystal, and the Warrior of Light likewise grew powerful from the prayers of their comrades. You could say that the power granted by the Mother Crystal is significantly greater than the power from the Scion's prayers, But then you have to keep in mind that Zenos would most likely be exhausted by now, seeing as he had to travel across the blood universe to reach here, and you also gotta hand it to him. He was flying at super light speeds across the universe chasing after the Endsinger, while eating exploding planets and God knows what else like breakfast. The dude even tanks the ultimate twice in a row like it's nothing.
Oh, look at that! Taking it like a champ!
Meanwhile, you had to only, in quotations, go through the final dungeon. Then you have the fact that you are fighting in the one place in the entire universe where Dynamis, power of the emotion, is at its strongest. This works to the benefit of both the Warrior Flight and Zenos, both individuals who are incredibly driven in this situation. I appreciate that the playing field is even, despite the fact that both of you took very separate paths to reach this point. It makes the battle truly feel like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, and I love it. Some people express this thought that there should have been an option to walk away. I guess this mainly comes from the fact that you can refuse to fight him earlier on in the MSQ, and the fact that he himself gives you that choice, as well as this sentiment coming from people who never really liked Zenos as a character and thus had no investment in this fight. I am going to take the side of the developers on this one and agree with their decision to leave out such an option. First of all, I'd like to remind you that despite being an MMO, FF14 is still a JRPG at heart, and one doesn't need to spend long with JRPGs to see that they rarely go for any sort of branching paths and instead utilize a linear way of storytelling. Second, the logistics side of things. This fight is an integral part of the story structure as well as it existing to serve the gameplay by being a fun fight for the player to cap off the expansion. Leaving it out causes a lot of trouble. And thirdly, I simply struggle to relate to this sentiment. I just don't see why you would not want to fight him. But if you feel like this should have been an option, please do let me know in the comments because I am genuinely curious. It's interesting that I have seen people refer to Zenos as the real final boss. The developers on the other hand had this to say, coming from Mr. Yoshida. They were worried about how to handle Zenos. He's the only one who sees the Warrior Flight as an adventure and not just a hero, so the fight is more of an extra than a final boss. But I can see both sides of it. You know, it's quite funny because I've had to engage in this debate since the dawn of time with Final Fantasy X, with people debating whether BFA or you-know-who was the final boss of that game. For me personally, the reason I consider the Endsinger the real final boss is because the way I myself see the last boss of a game is that it is the final challenge you have to overcome to earn your rights to see the credits. And so I thought that Zenos doesn't qualify simply based on the fact that there was a mechanic put in place that prevents you from losing. And I'm not being hyperbolic. Depending on difficulty, you will have 13 stacks of the Dynamis buff, meaning you would have to die a ton of times to actually fail the duty, meaning you would have to pretty much sabotage yourself and die on purpose to lose. The fight being unlosable then makes me think that the only reason this is a fight at all is so that they can retain some form of an interactive element. It's basically wanting to have your cake and eat it. You want the cinematic experience, but at no cost to gameplay. And so I myself always took Endsinger as the real final boss. But I've definitely had friends telling me that they saw Zenos as the last boss, instead of something extra as Mr. Yoshida described there. It's an interesting question to ask someone because people have different interpretations of what the final boss of a game is. But regardless, I think making the fight a solo instance was the right move. The first time we fought Zenos was in a solo instance, so it's rather fitting that we should finish on that note. It also just makes the whole thing feel more personal and climactic. Now, talking about the fight itself. As I said, it was mostly a cinematic experience, but I appreciate the effort they put into giving it as much oomph as possible when it came to gameplay too. The revive mechanic is a neat gimmick, because it is a crude way of emphasizing that you are both on equal footing when both of you fell at least once in this fight. I like how the fight progresses, phase 1 having more attacks from Shinryu, with phase 2 moving more towards having attacks from his avatar. My favorite attack was probably the Shinryu tail laser from the extreme version of that trial. That definitely caught me off guard. The fight also gave us a legendary meme in the form of a test of your reflexes, and who am I to say no to a good meme? Lastly, the fist fight at the end. Metal Gear Solid 4 Persona 5 Royal Endwalker. I don't know what it is with these Japanese gaming companies and having the last fight be a fist fight, but I love it. Also, this was such a wonderful way of utilizing the main theme of the expansion. Don't lie, you were fired up when you heard it. Of course, this fight has different connotations and different feels depending on which role you play. I myself played Gunbreaker and I really enjoyed it from a tank point of view. Reaper is of course a solid choice here, and I feel maybe a big reason why they put so much effort into making Reaper's animations as cool and flashy as possible was to hope that more people would play it for this battle. I heard playing the fight as a healer is the least riveting experience, which is understandable because of the 1 to the 1 to the 1 to the 1 to the 1 gameplay, but I suppose it's amusing to have a white mage toss away their cane and start punching the shit out of people, because let's be real, who wouldn't want to do that in a dungeon? Also, I gotta share this funny moment I had when I did this fight for the first time. Oh my god. Bro, let's go!
Hold nothing back! Push yourself to your limit and me to mine!
The fuck? Oh, fuck me.
Ha! Still fighting you, I see.
My fucking mouse died. Alright, so the death scene, right? Let's talk about a few things here. Firstly, there is definitely a lot in this scene that is up to interpretation. For example, he was the one who summoned the teleportation device to save the warrior flight. This is due to optional dialogue that you can get from Urianger in the Rising Stones just before you finish the story. This line can of course be interpreted in many ways. It could have been Zenos, it could have been yourself, it could have been Meteon or even the Scions, but I personally believe having Zenos be the one is the most fitting as well, and I'll explain why in a bit. Another thing left very much ambiguous is Zenos' last words.
Did you find fulfillment?
He doesn't get to finish whether or not he found fulfillment in his life. There are two choices here, or I guess three. Either he did find fulfillment and he did want to live but he died, thus making it more tragic. This is a pretty classic writing technique. Even such iconic villains as Darth Vader die by having been badly injured in combat, and as they start to make a turnaround at the end, they succumb to their wounds and die. The other way of looking at it is that, no, he did not find fulfillment, and he at least wanted the warrior flight to live on because he realized that he himself would struggle to find any kind of fulfillment in his life. Or you could go for the neutral route and say maybe he was unsure. In the end though, it doesn't matter however you choose to perceive it, which is why I think the writers had it end like that. It's also worth mentioning that if you subscribe to the idea of Zenos being the one to summon the teleportation device, is that it sets his original death scene in perfect juxtaposition. At the end of 4.0, he killed himself because he found his fulfillment, a rather selfish act, but he was happy. At the end of 6.0, we aren't sure if he found his fulfillment, but his final act is not selfish, but rather to save his only friend. And before someone says it, no, I am not claiming this was him getting redeemed. Zenos was an absolute scumbag of a person that caused an untold amount of suffering, and there is no way in hell that this act unmakes all of that in any capacity. I do, however, like the fact that his final act wasn't him being a selfish cunt, but rather doing something for the one person that he perceived of as his friend. Another thing to note about this scene is the choice of music. It plays the somber instrumental piano version of Answers, a song that, if I am not mistaken, only ever plays in scenes with Vena/Heidelin in 6.0, yet a sole exception exists here at the end, where it plays with Zenos and the Warrior of Light. I find this really interesting. The easiest and most boring answer to this would be, well, they just wanted to have something more special instead of the generic sad theme, so they chose this. But I like to imagine that there is a bit more of a meaning behind it, and that meaning can be found when you take a look at what the song Answers is about thematically. I've always found the most important bit of this song to be this one at the end. The song talks about the riddle of life, basically what it means to live. In this sense, I find Answers to be a fitting song to be playing here, as it handles whether both Zenos and the Warrior of Light found their lives to be fulfilling or not. Now, regarding Zenos' death scene, I believe that after making an effort to better understand people around him, mainly the Warrior of Light, and after having seeked this fight out with them for so long and now feeling disappointed after the fact, that Zenos was finally able to understand why people find life worth living, for the occasional yet simple pleasures. This is something that he had always struggled to personally feel, but he now finally understood this thanks to observing those around him. And in understanding that desire to live, he wanted others to live, most of all his friend, because you only have one candle to burn, and he didn't want his friends to end there. Alright, this is gonna be the end of the video. I hope you were able to enjoy this deep dive into the fight and most of its aspects. I would end this with a question. Was this fight enough of a payoff for you, given that we have been leading up to this encounter since 4.3, meaning since 2018? Granted, not all of you would have been playing back then, but I am curious either way. As always, subscribing is an easy way to stick around and get more content like this. Have a nice day!